Well, good morning. I'm Karen Pearman from What's New in Electronics. I'm here today at SMT Connect in Nuremberg, and I'm joined this morning by four gentlemen on our panel. We're going to be discussing future-proofing our industry and the next steps. But before we do that, Stan, did you want to just say a few words as to who you are and...
Of course, thanks. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
It's great to be here in Nuremberg at SMT Connect. I'm Stan Farnsworth, Chief Marketing Officer of PulseForge, and we are a relatively new entrant into the SMT community, coming from a long background in flexible and printed electronics, and we're bringing into the SMT community a new variant of our PulseForge tools, which is specially designed for very ultra-quick soldering, reflowing solder in a second or less, and enabling the application of that on ultra-thin, lightweight plastics. So soldering onto plastic at PulseForge.
Fantastic. Morning, Harald.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Harald Eppinger. I'm the General Manager from Koyong Europe. Our business is inspection and 3D measurement in these electronic processes. And I'm representing the Korean company and looking forward to what we will have on the panel here.
Good morning, I'm Tom Forsythe from Kyzen Corporation. I'm an executive VP there, mostly in the marketing area these days. And we, of course, are the cleaning folks that are involved deeply in assembly and the advanced packaging in arenas worldwide.
And I'm Dave Trail, VP of Sales for Arch Systems. We're a data analytics company working with manufacturing data and some modern technologies such as cloud and unique brokerage structures to be able to fuel the technologies and concepts like AI and machine learning within our industry.
Thank you. So this morning, looking at future-proofing our industry, and obviously coming out of 2 years of uncertainty, including pandemic and ongoing semiconductor shortages and geopolitical issues. One of the questions I wanted to speak about this morning is what is the next industry's challenge? And obviously we've been speaking a lot about that over the past few days, and just looking at the future growth opportunities for this sector. Stan, I don't know if I can start with you and we can get the ball rolling.
Sure, of course. Right, so the pandemic, we've learned a lot through the pandemic. And what we've learned at PulseForge and through our ecosystem is that innovation has not stopped. Innovation finds a way and absolutely continued. And sometimes innovation is born by necessity, such as the very rapid increase in digitization that we've seen over the last couple of years. But also innovation happens over a long term. And over the last couple of years, companies like PulseForge that have been developing innovations in a deep technology kind of way are finding that the markets now are more receptive than ever to incorporating and adopting these technologies. And I think what's happened from our perspective is that so many groups, as they re-engage more broadly in the ecosystem and the community, they really have their eyes open, their ears open to understand what has evolved, what has changed. And I think there's a tremendous willingness to look at and embrace and be more interested in adopting new technologies now.
I think from our point of view, we realized that the pandemic showed us that globalization has to change. The reshoring is one of the challenges. We have to learn to get the things back. We also learned that the new technology is not longer a labor cost driven. We can do the same here in Europe because it's highly automated. And utilizing these small structures, which now everywhere in the wearables, in every component, is also getting the innovation. And using the technology we deliver as measurement equipment to get the twin, the digital twin. So everybody's talking about this. This is all starting the future.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've all come to realize that during the pandemic, the things that we relied on or thought were nice to have features, like, gee, we could do a conference call or we could do a video call, they were handy, they were convenient. They moved from that to life, that we needed those things. People were using those tools to go to the doctors. And what does that do? That changed our perception of reliability. There are only a couple of constants in the electronics industry over the decades I've been involved, and the most major one is miniaturization. that the only thing we can be sure of a few years from now is that everything we touch will have smaller devices and components, perhaps at lower power in some cases, in case of EV, perhaps at higher power. And that sense of reliability is where Kyzen sort of kicks in. Our view has always been with the people where reliability is key. Cleaning has had its ups and downs over the generations in our industry. And as these things go, we see that reliability, that perception of reliability is changing, and the consumer is seeing those needs. And as we look to the future, the demands from the consumer for that high reliability will only continue to grow, whether it's inspection, whether it's quicker reflow, and those are all just major trends that are going to encompass all of us.
Yeah, obviously the last 2 years really changed a lot how we do business, and companies were faced with personnel issues where they didn't have the staff that they were used to. People were not able to go into the office or the factory, so they had to react in ways that were different than what they were used to doing. And rather than being, having experts with feet on the floor at each and every site, each and every manufacturing line, they didn't have that capability. So companies had to use, some web-based technologies or the cloud to enable data analysis and access from remote locations. And what we saw occur over the last couple of years, and this was compounded with the retirement of several people in our industry, and maybe not the skills being present to replace those. We saw regionalization and specialization, where instead of having to get on a plane and go visit a factory and figure out what's going on and how to improve it, people were able to do that from a regional data center or from their homes in a lot of cases.
That's so true. And looking in this space that we had over the past 3 days, and looking at how, as an industry, is it possible then to, rather than react to the next steps, how do you see the future responding? So taking what you've learned over the past 2 years and protecting the future, how would you see that, Harald?
I think we learned to utilize what is already available on the market. Typically, to adapt the technology, to adapt the methodology, it takes a while. This industry is, on one hand, innovative industry, on the other hand, a very conservative industry. So to utilize factory automation, to share data between the vendors, all these kind of things is, yes, it's a nice idea, it's good to have, it's all these kind of things. But the situation of the remote work desk enables and forces the people to use the tools which are already implemented by us as vendors.
Yeah.
So it was a trigger to gain more out what is already existing.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is the signal, yes, that's the future. And also between the vendors, there was a different cooperation. Instead of solving the problems together at the customer side, the people start to work on that level to come with a solution to the customer. That's why what I think is one of the biggest learnings.
Dave, how about you? Would you share the same opinion?
Yeah, I totally agree with it. The other thing that we saw is, we're living in a world of shortages. Shortages of components, of personnel, resources in a lot of different ways, and most companies are also trying to conserve. There's a big green push going on, rightly so. So it's about, I agree using the tools that you have, but I also agree that you need to use the tools that you have much more efficiently than what you have in the past. And when we look at even world-class facilities, and you look at utilization across some of their machines, you'll ask them, what's your utilization? And they'll say 80, 90%. It's wonderful, it's fantastic. But once you start digging into the data and looking at the true usage of those SMT lines or manufacturing lines, typically, even in world-class facilities, you're down at 30 or 40%. And why is that? Because they want to be flexible, they want to have the capability for capacity improvements and things like that. But in these days, you need to be able to make sure that your processes are as finely tuned as possible, and this digitization is really fueling a lot of that, rather than sitting there with stopwatches and measuring things on the back end. You can measure things in real time and improve very rapidly.
So true. And Tom, your thoughts?
Well, I think some of the innovation that's happened during COVID has been exactly what Harald mentioned. It's we're innovating, the operators at the factory level have been innovating using what's there, both mechanically and software-wise that's in front of them, they can touch it, but also their network of suppliers and vendors. And that as the industry ages and people retire, and we know that the pyramid has been shrinking over the years because of labor costs and whatnot, well, those internal experts are less and less available. There are fewer and fewer of them. So the vendor network, whether it's mechanical or materials or software, it's critical for deeper and deeper integration with our customers for them to really leverage those assets that they have. And that's been it's innovation, it's true innovation because it's changing practices and policies. But in one way, are you really innovating if you're using something that's been sitting there for a year? One could make the case that maybe innovation isn't the right word, but I think it genuinely is because you're innovating the practices and you're getting tremendous payback because you're not adding any capital or resources, yet you're getting return. And I think that's an infinite return, which mostly is a good thing. So I think that's been a core part of innovation and how do we work through these challenges together with the supplier base of all manners as well as the on-site engineering teams.
And your thoughts, Dan?
I think one of the fundamental challenges is potentially this paradigm conflict between having a stable, standardized, robust manufacturing process that's consistent, repeatable, and reliable, and efficient and effective. But how do you introduce new technologies and new concepts into that aren't necessarily as mature and as well understood? And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity in the manufacturing community to find a way to strike that balance between meeting the quality objectives that, of course, manufacturing needs to have for reliability of the products for the OEMs, but then also how to be just the right amount of aggressive and exploratory in understanding how new technologies can improve business opportunities in the bigger picture and make the determination to work with the technology providers and the OEMs on how to stabilize and build robustness around those new technologies into the product lifecycle.
Interesting. So in many ways, I think COVID has given us all a reset button. And we're pausing and we're looking at the future. And next, obviously, none of us have a crystal ball in terms of the next steps. But what would you want to see in place? And as we've mentioned briefly about an aging industry and a gap, what would your vision be for the next few months, years?
Well, I think there's a tremendous opportunity to think about a more distributed workforce. I think the traditional model of having all the competencies and expertise in-house in the office every day is really been put to the challenge right now with all of these points that have been mentioned around changing over in the workforce, around skill labor shortages, and I think that, and regionalization. So I think that with the new digitization that we've seen, the growing acceptance on remote video communications, and I think we'll find other forms of communications evolve around relating to data and some other pieces around that. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity to explore how non-centralized competencies can be established.
I think the power to go forward is the mind change. I think we can use technology. I think for us is we have to go forward. We should not be afraid. When I see COVID and the consequences of, let me say, starting to think about risk management, and not risk management as a bad word, just as a good word, said, yes, we can do it. It's not something, it's a miracle. We have to reinvent the world. We have to utilize the existing skills, the existing machinery, the existing experience in a new way to go forward. So we are ready for the future. I'm not questioning that we are not ready for the future, but we have to believe on our own that we are ready and we can step forward.
Tom, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's exactly right. And I think COVID has very much forced people out of their comfort zone, I think, to say the least. But from if you're in the operations environment and you need to get product out the door, your risk mitigation is, well, I can't think about it for 3 days and make my decision. We've got to move forward. You've got to have the ability to make those decisions. You've got to very rapidly, whether it's data generated or supplier generated or in-house expert who's over the horizon somewhere, pull that information together rapidly and say, okay, now we turn left. Yes. Now. We don't turn left a week from Tuesday or a month from Tuesday or in third quarter. Now. And that's, I think, a change that that's been a gift of COVID, all right? That it's enabled, empowered people to make some of those decisions and changes, whereas 2 or 3 years ago, people were keeping their heads down and very risk averse, whereas now standing still is the risk rather than moving forward. So I think every rainy cloud has some benefits.
And how about for you, Dave? What's your perspective on that?
I think COVID, as horrible as it was a strong catalyst for change within our industry. People had to do things differently, so that was a mind switch in how they looked at their jobs, how they looked at what their businesses were, which types of products that they wanted to build, how they wanted to build them. And as our industry's processes, equipment, parts of the assembly line start to become more intelligent, there's more data shared, and more accessible, you're going to be able to do some pretty amazing things with your assembly lines. For years we've been able to look at, what's happening on the line, and you could look at the what, and you could, put up wonderful dashboards that would tell you what. But now what we're seeing is by leveraging these modern technologies, the accessibility and depth of information coming out of machines, now we can ask why. Mm-hmm. Why is my process doing this? And the whole industry is going to, we've talked about digitization for a while, but there was a lot of reluctance in that and resistance to change, and like you said, everybody's head was down, focused on this is my job, this is what I have to do, but people had to become more flexible in how they thought about things, and I think that's going to drive this intelligence shift that's going to occur within our industry, and just make the entire process much more efficient and more capable to deal with some of these newer technologies that we see coming down the lines in the future.
So with that in mind, and as you say, that business is switching from a risk mindset to a growth mindset, with things which are still out of our control, with war and supply chain issues, how would you see that going forward over the next few months as China still is in lockdown in various parts, when obviously you want to be able to have that growth mindset, but things are out of your control for your customer?
That's the influences we cannot control, that's very clear. I would like to reflect in 2020, we have been nearly shock frozen when the COVID started, and it takes us really time to handle it. 21, the situation did not really change, the COVID was still there, but from our point of view, we had a regular business that we're getting used to, and I think that's the most important thing. Instead of what will happen? Let's go forward, and we learn to manage it. And we have to learn to manage the war close to our borders, and we have to manage the impact of trade wars between nations. It will not change. But maybe we find the right ways to handle it and not to let them disturb us.
And adding to that, as I've reflected on how COVID and the trade wars and all these other things have impacted us, I've realized that our industry in particular, but the global economy generally, that we've spent the last 30 or 40 years creating the most efficient system in the world for moving things around. I've kind of used the phrase hyper efficient, in that we've squeezed every cent out of every cost. Mm-hmm. But on the path to that, we've become a bit more fragile. And that not that a trade war is a small thing or a real war is a small thing, but our systems have become fragile. This point of regionalization and supply chains having a broader base geographically, what does that do? That brings some robustness to things. It's okay, well, we can think about a trade war, but a big typhoon can throw things off for a few weeks, or a big hurricane or an earthquake or things like that. I believe that the world in general and our industry in particular have learned that supply chains that are that actually look like a chain, if you pick it up from the floor, are dangerous. They need to look more like a Christmas tree that's got a little shape to it and a broader base. And I believe that may bring a bit of inefficiency, but with it, it's going to bring a vast amount of resilience and robustness that's going to help us all navigate whatever the next thing that we don't know is coming arrives. And so it won't paralyze us as some of the supply chain issues have over the last 2 years. So I think that's a big change that's coming forward.
Stan?
Right. I think I agree completely with all of this, and I think this has really emphasized the significance of relationship and multiple relationships. And circling back to why SMT Connect is important, this is the place where we build those relationships and reaffirm those relationships and look for new relationships to give us business flexibility, to help us be adaptable in these very uncertain times. I don't think they're going to be less uncertain. I think they're going to be more uncertain. And so being able to come together in person, I think, is very reaffirming for that and is very helpful for giving us the right stance to be successful going forward.
Dave?
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to second that. It's great to be back together. It's great to be, in person and seeing people's faces without the masks and everything like that. So I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I've also started to see is the metrics or the KPIs or the things that people watch, I think, are different now, and they're going to continue to evolve. One of the things that we see in our business is when you go to talk to somebody about their manufacturing process, they'll say, I have my quality rate 99%. What could you do with that last 1%? And we say things like, well, what cost is that 1%? What if you could, still get good quality but improve your processes even more? And what if you could use the power of, some of this data intelligence that's out there to, predict, the outcomes and address things before they become things, and actually start to prescribe changes throughout the process that allows people to react much more quickly, whether it be, supply chain issues or a conflict in a certain part of the world that just throws a giant wrinkle in everything that we're doing. This ability to react quickly without losing, your efficiencies and the way you build a product, and allow you to react at a time that makes it, allows you to make good business decisions too.
Gentlemen, thank you. I'm just wondering if we've got any questions from the floor. No. There's been a lot of nodding heads this morning. It's been a great pleasure to chat through this morning. I don't know if there's anyone that wants to close with something, but in terms of our next steps, but just want to say thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.